for the City Police Department to destroy unclaimed and decommissioned firearms. And then the second is an ordinance relating to pedestrian protections and pedestrian safety. Chief Fard, thank you for your work on these. And I will note that I think both are supported by the Sheriff's Department as well, who's
Yes.
that police is the lead on it.
All right, so we're starting with the firearms one.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Council. So TO number 2506, this is a proposal to change or amend City Code Chapter 28, Article 7, Sections 28-201, titled Destruction of Sales of Unclaimed Firearms. The proposed changes are required, are to require that all unclaimed firearms in possession of the city's two law enforcement agencies, the Police Department and the Sheriff's Office, be destroyed when legally permissible, and to prohibit the reselling of decommissioned service firearms to firearm dealers in return for rebates or discounts, which is the current practice. On line 20, the Falls Church Police Department is responsible for the safekeeping of unclaimed firearms, including firearms that deemed to be unclaimed property. Those no longer required for criminal prosecution and those obtained during gun buyback program events, and those owned by the Police Department and the Sheriff's Office. We're both committed, the Sheriff and I, to ensuring the safekeeping and disposing of these firearms to ensure they'll never be involved in future crimes and sustaining injuries or deaths. Line 35. The Department and the Sheriff's Office believe that risk of decommissioned service weapons, firearms being misused far outweigh any financial incentives there may be for the current practice. We believe that these practices are aligned with our public safety mission and priorities. And we ask and recommend that we schedule reading for these ordinance amendments. And these city ordinances are under the authority of Code of Virginia 15-2-17-19 and 15-2-17-21. And just acknowledge the partnership that I've had with the sheriff on this endeavor of updating this amendment and bringing this to your attention.
Great. Thank you for that. Vice Mayor?
Thank you. I just wanted to thank Chief Fard and Sheriff Kay for their work on this, their work on the gun buyback program last year, which resulted in hundreds of firearms being removed and destroyed that can no longer be on the street or involved in any future crimes. So I'm in huge support of this, and certainly don't want to make any financial gains off of what could be a future tragedy. So I'm very happy to move this forward and look forward to voting it into law and ensuring that we in Falls Church City are not propagating any violence with firearms or other weapons that are resold back into the system. So thank you to you all, your department, and all the sheriffs who have been involved in this as well for your leadership in ensuring that this moves forward. It's really important work.
Thank you.
Ditto that indeed. Aaron?
Thank you, and I'll echo Mrs. Scott's comments and also just agree from a, policy and public safety perspective with this. I had one question, which is on line 138, so subsection D of the ordinance language. This is the provision just about, the destruction within 90 days of, being declared permanently decommissioned. And I just, from a practical standpoint, wanted to know, is it feasible to have destruction basically occurring on a quarterly basis, given the practical considerations like the witness requirement and whatever else that often accompanies narcotics and disposal of narcotics,
right,
in the same way, that are you comfortable that you'll be able to comply with, the 90-day window that you've provided yourselves?
Yeah, thanks, Ms. Flynn, for asking that question. For that particular line, you said 137, 138, that pertains only to the decommissioned service weapons. So there's no legal proceedings for us to be able to meet that deadline. If there are firearms involved in crimes, we do have to go through the Commonwealth Attorney's Office, and there needs to be a court order issued. So none of that will occur after those orders are issued by the court. But the decommissioned weapons, and we don't buy guns that often, so we'll know well in advance when we have to prepare for destruction. So thanks for looking out for that.
And I think you said it's like a decade that we haven't purchased anything.
Yeah,
Roughly a decade, so.
Yeah, different guns, different times, but yeah, not that often.
Okay, who else has questions? Okay, I had, do you have one? Okay, I had two. So one, appreciate Debbie and the sheriff and police department's work last year in the gun buyback program. Ideally, that would be an annual event that we can support, because clearly there was more demand than gift cards and incentives we had last year and resources. So I think there's certainly additional guns we could recover back in the community. So we'd look to our staff for ability to partner with Arlington on that. The second is actually, I met an artist out of Falls Church Arts last year who was actually taking guns that were, I think in DC, that were kind of similar, either decommissioned or unclaimed weapons, and actually turning it into public art. And she was working on a memorial for victims of gun violence. So that seemed like a potential good use, as long as they're getting destroyed and follows the procedures we've outlined.
Sure.
And so I'm happy to connect the artists with our departments.
Sure, that'd be great. And if I may, I think this is a good opportunity for me to remind the public that if anyone has any firearms that they want to surrender, maybe it's a former family member, they can just reach out to us. We may not have a gift card for them, but we can facilitate taking that firearms off their hand. Just make sure they call us before they come down so we can make sure we do that transaction safely.
That's a good PSA next week when we have the schedule for first reading.
Okay.
Justine, do you have one now?
Yeah, it's not fully formed, but I'm just wondering if you could maybe address the public generally. What does this program do? So does it make the cost of guns more expensive for people because now there are fewer guns on the market? Or what are the general consequences of doing a program like this in terms of the amount of guns that we have available?
Yeah, well, it's a small department. We don't have that many guns, so I don't think it's going to have any impact on the market. But yeah, I don't think it'll have any negative effect on the purchasing market, if you will. It will make sure that none of our guns, whether in our possession or in our ownership, ever end up in the wrong hand and be used in hurting someone. I certainly would want my name attached to that, and I think that gives us, all of us, the assurance that that won't happen.
Thank you.
Yep.
Other questions? Okay, sounds like it's ready for first reading then. Thank you. You don't get to go yet, because I think we still have to talk about pedestrian safety. So that's
Ready for that one.
25-07, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
City Manager, do you want to say anything about that before I start?
Well, I would just say thank you for bringing this forward. I know that this authority has existed from the General Assembly for over a year now, but it's good we're taking this action or recommending this action. I appreciate you bringing this forward.
Thank you. Yes, and I want to thank the City Attorney's Office. They've been very helpful in helping us get this to the staff report before you. So TO 2507 is the ordinance to amend the City Code of the City of Falls Church, Chapter 26, which is the Motor Vehicles and Traffic Code. And what we're trying to do here is we are adding an entire new article number 8, titled Pedestrian Protection. So within that article, we're adding 2 specific ordinances, and these are with key provisions to require that motorists stop and not just yield for pedestrians within marked crosswalks at intersections, and a provision that police officer cannot stop pedestrians for crossing the street outside of a marked crossing, and I'll explain that a little bit more in a second. And of course, the city's authority to install signs at marked crosswalks and to assess special fines for violation of those signs. And the authority for this particular action by the city comes under Code of Virginia Title 46-2, which is the Motor Vehicles Code, Subtitle 3, and Chapter 8 is the regulation of traffic, and within that, we have Article 16, which is all about pedestrian safety. So where in that article it allows localities such as ours to enact ordinances that go to provide further safety for our pedestrians on our roadways. So the General Assembly did grant local governments that new authority to enact those ordinances, and there were some additions in July 1 of 23 that changed the Code of Virginia requiring vehicles to yield to pedestrians at all crosswalks to a requirement that vehicles stop for pedestrians at unsignalized pedestrian crossings on roads with speed limits of 35 miles an hour or less. So the proposed new sections that we have in the city code follows closely with the state law provisions, and staff is recommending that we look at these ordinances and have CACT take a look at them and provide reviews and recommendations for enactment. I'm happy to answer any questions. Oh, the one part I said I was going to go back to, the part about police not being able to stop pedestrians for crossing the street outside of a marked crossing. So this comes from the special session in 2022 where there was a lot of police reform actions, and this is commonly called the jaywalking code. So that's in state law, and we're just bringing that to our city code, so for our officers to be familiar with it even more.
Laura?
Could you provide a little bit more context, Chief? So what was the reason? I mean, just, I understand it was part of reform, and it was just, was it to promote pedestrian safety? I'm just not understanding the background on that.
I think there was a lot of discussions around the police reform movements, whether or not police were stopping pedestrians for other reasons, using the pedestrian stop as a pretextual stop for other investigations that may not have been proper. So the legislators took that action so that pretextual stop for pedestrians were removed from the code.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Yes, thank you.
Dave?
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. This is another example, I think, of where we're trying to use whatever authority we're given by the state for traffic safety purposes. We've used the reduction in speed limits to 20 miles per hour, for example. So this is another example of using that authority. A couple questions. First of all, some of the more serious infractions are based upon signs being placed at intersections. Can the city manager tell us about the plans for those signs so that we get the maximum enforcement? And also, are there audio visuals or other things that help explain exactly some of the scenarios, because a couple of these sections are surprisingly complicated, and we need to make the rules as direct and as simple as possible, both for pedestrians and car drivers. So a quick comment, Chief, about enforcement, and then for the city manager about placing signs so that we could have the maximum enforcement that we can.
Who would like to go first? So maybe provide kind of what the signage would be required for adequate financing.
Yeah.
I know there's been discussions between the police and DPW about the signage, but I don't know that we have a budget request ready for the council at this point. But Chief, maybe you could describe what that signage requirement is.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the crossing signs that we've seen at crosswalks outside of the intersections, right? Like, so there's one out here on Park Avenue in front of City Hall where it's outside of an intersection. There's signage there, and the language there is to yield, right? Where the enforcement becomes challenging is, has the driver yield or not when there's a pedestrian, right? And a lot of times, it's almost as if there has to be a collision before failure to yield can be established, right? That's not where we want to be, but where the signage is changed to having to stop as opposed to yield, then that's very clear. The vehicle's motion needs to come to a stop. We do have at least one or two of those signs. I believe it's on Southwest Street near the county line, but the majority of other signs in the city outside of intersections talk about yielding. So the changes in the signage would be to that detail, and the enforcement would be a little bit easier. And it also plays into our hawk signals that are coming up, since those are mid-intersections and for enforcement. And then the penalties, the state code penalty maximum is $100. Localities are able to increase that fine anywhere between $100 to $500. So that part of it. So I have talked to Mr. Snyder, I have talked to Public Works about the signage. So that's, in terms of cost, we'll have to continue to look at that. I don't think we have a good figure right now to share.
I'd very much like us to move forward because I want maximum enforcement. With the number one public safety issue, which we all get, is out of control traffic, and anything that helps bring that under control and provides a significant enough penalty for violations that it actually will help get enforcement. So perhaps in a future meeting, we could hear what the plans are for the signs that are necessary for enforcement.
We'll provide that. What we say in the staff report is that we'll provide that by second reading. We'll provide it as soon as we have it, but certainly you'll have it before you're asked to vote on this after the public hearing.
Okay.
I could jump in here. From what I've seen from other jurisdictions, it's primarily the paddles that are mid-crosswalk that have been changed from yield to stop for pedestrians. I know we've had mixed experiences with those paddles because they get hit.
Run over.
But I think it's worth looking at those because they do slow people down, even if they do get hit, and it's a shame to have to replace them, but they are very noticeable when they're mid-crosswalk and it says stop. So, other
Yeah,
questions?
just to finish up, I think some clarity here. One thing that I see is, confusion or sort of, do I stop, do I not stop, when do I stop, can I go in front of the pedestrian if the pedestrian is crossing? So anything that can bring some clarity and make it enforceable, I think will benefit both pedestrians and car drivers. Thanks.
Mary Beth?
Thank you for that, Chief Hard. I have a few questions.
Sure.
On line 77, it says pedestrians may cross an intersection diagonally when all traffic entering the intersection hasn't been halted by lights, other control devices, or by a law enforcement officer. One of the things that we've talked about over time are scramble intersections. Is this saying that we would be allowed to have a scramble intersection where all the lights are red and then pedestrians can cross in any direction?
I don't think that's what it means. I'd have to ask the engineers exactly the type of design that this may apply to.
Okay, because that's something I know a few of us are interested in.
I don't think it's precluded, we just haven't taken the steps to make it
DPW's
active.
told me Virginia does not allow scrambles.
Right.
Law, I thought it was
Yeah.
overridden before already.
But reading this, it sounds like it does.
It means that we won't fine them for doing it, but I don't think I don't know whether, question for staff, whether we would still be
Yeah.
allowed to pilot a scramble intersection.
Anyway, yeah, that's just my question is, does this mean we could do something with a scramble intersection? Does it have anything, when a pedestrian is crossing in a crosswalk, are the drivers supposed to wait until the pedestrian is completely out of the crosswalk? Or if the driver's in front of one lane and then goes into the next lane, is the driver allowed to go while the pedestrian is in the other lane?
Are we talking about at an intersection, or are we talking about a mid-block? What kind of?
Any kind of crosswalk.
Well, this is the challenge in the enforcement of it, right? So certainly the police officer can interpret whether the vehicle has yield or not. If it's a stop sign, that the vehicle come to a full stop. So that's the challenge I was talking about earlier, because part of the defense for the driver will be, will I yield it? Prove I didn't, right? So that's where I was talking about, like, you almost have to have a collision before you can demonstrate that there was no yield.
I guess my question is, how long do they have to stop? Do they have to stop the whole time the pedestrian is in the crosswalk?
I think my interpretation is when the pedestrian is safely out of danger of that vehicle.
Of that vehicle, okay.
But again, ultimately, if a citation is issued, I'm not the judge.
Yeah.
So that's just my interpretation as a law enforcement officer.
Well, the last question is just about driver's education, since we have a bunch of teenagers that will be getting their driver's license soon. Is this the kind of thing that when kids are learning driver education, that would have to be emphasized in Falls Church if we do it and other jurisdictions don't, or?
I think drivers' educations include this particular part, but I feel like I'm being tested. I'm not sure.
I'm just thinking, as we're talking about, like, when you're driving, you just sort of get an autopilot. So
Yeah.
if things are changing, how are we going to educate people? You know, I've driven through this crosswalk 1,000
Yeah.
times. It says yield, it's in a little red sign. Then the next day it says stop. I
Right.
might not even really see it.
Right.
Because it's just a little red sign with white letters, and I'm not reading it
Yeah.
because I'm just driving on
Yeah.
autopilot.
So
So I'm just
that-
thinking about that, like
Yeah.
education campaign, not just for new drivers, but for all drivers.
Yeah, no, I mean, if it says stop, I mean, the sign, the size of the sign, the visibility of it is a different matter, but assuming a driver sees the sign, if it says stop, I think that's pretty self-explanatory, right? And I think a lot of us and the public can just, if we all use some courtesy and we see someone in a crosswalk, wait for them to clear, that's the message I would give to our community, is to wait for that pedestrian to clear that crosswalk. So, because you never know what a pedestrian is going to do, right? They may change direction and backtrack. So you don't want to proceed until they leave the crosswalk, would be my view on that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? Aaron?
I'm going to ask, I guess, a question similar to Mr. Snyder, just on how this applies. So when we're talking, I mean, I agree with everything that's here, but when we're talking about, for example, going from the yield to pedestrian in the crosswalk to stop, are we envisioning signs in every instance? Because there would either be a pre-existing stop sign, and so you should stop already, or there's a mid-block crosswalk that has one of those that would turn into a stop. It would be a stop, no longer yield, sign, or are there instances in which there's an unsigned crosswalk in which you'd now need to stop if there's a pedestrian there? And you would hope that as a matter of courtesy, right? Because before everyone was preoccupied texting while they're driving, it used to be that you'd see pedestrians and you'd slow, or you'd wave the pedestrian across the street if they weren't going to be in danger of crossing. So I'm just trying to figure out the signage versus the application of the rule where you don't necessarily have a sign. Do we have marked crosswalks that don't have corresponding signs of any kind?
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good question. Pedestrians do not have an absolute right of way. You have to cross at a crosswalk. So this does apply to crosswalks. Now, if it's at an intersection where there are stop signs, obviously the vehicles need to come to a complete stop. If it's at a signal, if it's red, they need to come to a stop. If they're making a right on red, they need to yield to pedestrians in the crosswalk. So in a crosswalk, pedestrians have the right of way to some extent. So I think the particular code section is talking about those instances where there is a crosswalk and the pedestrian is within that crosswalk.
Justine?
Thank you so much for bringing this forward. I'm really glad to see this coming through. I did have a question about one of the lines, I believe it was line 103. Let me go there. Let me get there. Yeah, that no pedestrian shall enter or cross at an intersection in disregard of approaching traffic. I realize that there's some discretion involved in this, but how does one determine whether or not discretion was, or disregard was applied by the pedestrian?
Are you talking about discretion in terms of enforcement?
Yeah, I mean, so in terms of no pedestrian shall enter or cross an intersection in disregard of approaching traffic,
And which line are you on? I'm sorry.
103.
103.
I guess, how would one determine disregard?
Well, the challenge for the enforcement part is back under 26-200 in line 81, where no law enforcement officer shall stop a pedestrian for violation of this section. So the next section, 26-201, talks about pedestrian right-of-way. So if a pedestrian is entering or crossing a street and disregarding a approaching traffic, so the code section is going to apply if we do have a crash and we're trying to determine fault during that investigation. So I think it would play during that scenario.
Gotcha.
Not so much in the enforcement aspect of it.
I see, okay. And so that would be, if there were to be some sort of crash, did the pedestrian look both ways? I guess there's other things that you would look into.
Yeah, we don't advise pedestrians to cross the street outside of a crosswalk. That's just not safe. We want to make sure everybody's crossing at a crosswalk. So,
Right, but I guess even with a crosswalk, I guess using their, are they disregarding traffic if the car is within 15 feet or 30 feet or 5 feet? And so at what point is a pedestrian at fault?
that's a good question.
Yeah, but I guess, but it sounds like, I guess what I'm hearing is that there's discretion when the investigation is happening.
That's right. And
after the crash.
there's going to be judgment and, on the facts of the case itself.
Okay, great. And then my other question, when it comes to yield, and this was my understanding of yield signs, is that if there is a pedestrian present, you then stop. Does yield mean that you do not have to come to a complete stop?
Depends.
Okay.
So if there's a pedestrian in a crosswalk and if you are not yielding and you're in danger of striking the pedestrian, then I think that means stopping. So yielding is the yield of right-of-way. So there's going to be a lot of interpretation on the specific merits of the case and the facts surrounding the particular example you might be thinking about. So
Okay, so basically my understanding from what you're saying is that if a car can slow down such that it wouldn't obviously get into any sort of crash with the pedestrian, then that is still considered yielding even if they don't necessarily come to a complete stop.
Well, my interpretation of a crosswalk with a pedestrian, it is the vehicle should yield until that pedestrian clears the crosswalk.
Okay.
I think that's the safest thing.
Okay.
Because again, like I explained earlier, a driver can't determine what the pedestrian is going to do. And when that pedestrian is in a crosswalk, the pedestrian has the right of way. And drivers shouldn't take a risk, assume that the pedestrian is going to continue to walk in one direction when they could easily turn around and walk the other direction, or perhaps they drop their phone or their keys, right? So the safest action to accomplish yielding is to wait for the pedestrian to clear the crosswalk before proceeding.
And so now that would come with, we would be asking drivers to stop for.
That's right.
Okay,
That's right.
that makes sense. Thank you so much, I really appreciate
Sure.
that.
Other questions? Okay, I have a few. So glad that we actually are taking out the ability to fine people for jaywalking. I think that's something that was kind of long overdue, and in general support adding this. In light of, I think, the Hawks getting hopefully power from Dominion in the coming month, and then this change, it feels like we should roll out some just pedestrian safety education, maybe as a packet. I know OCOM was planning some videos about how both drivers and pedestrians should deal with Hawks, because they will be new to us, even though they're used throughout the region. So maybe we could also batch this up as a, pedestrian safety big push or social media campaign, so we can really boost awareness of it when both of these changes are implemented. I had a related question. I continue to experience, and personally, Debbie's going to make fun of me, because when I run on the streets, people do write on red all over the city. You're in the crosswalk. I've had to leap out of the way, in the crosswalk several times. Left turns are another issue. I know that left turns are often a cause of conflict, but right on red, frankly, I think the fact that we have 4 intersections, that are no right on red, whereas the rest of our intersections allow right on red, that's pretty confusing for people. Not that I want more signs everywhere, but I do think we should look at potential crashes based on turning vehicles and pedestrians and how many near misses. So I have not gotten hit, knock on wood, but there probably a fair number of near misses for the people in the community. And so in general, I would just ask that we look at, while we are exploring pedestrian safety, turning cars into crosswalks. I think that's, as we have more people walking on the streets, I imagine that we're going to have more potential conflicts.
I appreciate the feedback. We have been doing that. I submitted a request for several recommendations to DPW. Several of them have been approved, and we're just waiting for the signage to go up on some of them.
Oh, we're going to add more no right on red intersections?
Yes, on some of the intersections. So,
At some point, it's worth thinking about whether all the intersections on Broad then would merit it. If we get to a tipping point where you're like, gosh, half of them are going to be no right on red, is it just more confusing to have half no right on red and half that are regular? It's kind of like that Park Avenue stop sign. For years, Park and Lee did not have a stop sign, and it was just this one weird intersection that did not have it. And it seemed to make a lot more sense to finally add that stop sign.
So in the spirit of the conversations we've been having internally about Vision Zero, that is one of the things we're studying, just to have that be a citywide policy, and we'll provide the city council some feedback on that before we implement it, but that is in engineering as a thought process.
Okay. And then, since I think this code was given to us last year, maybe 2 years ago, similar to what Dave said, I think it'd be great for us to just take advantage of every pedestrian safety authority we have. If there's others in this upcoming session, let's pay close attention so we don't have to wait another year and a half since we got this authority.
okay.
And I will note for council, one of the things we're doing with this year's process, with the legislative tracking log, which council received an update this evening just before the meeting, we're putting the code section in there. So once all the General Assembly and governor action's done, we'll see what's passed. And then this is a process the city attorney and I have been working to fine tune. So at the end, we will have flagged key bills and code section changes for staff to look at to see what needs to come forward, if it's a required change or an optional one for council to consider. So that'll be on all bills, including the safety ones you're discussing this evening.
Great. And I was actually Googling Virginia scrambles, and actually on Route 1, VDOT is actually proposing putting in a scramble in an intersection. And so perhaps they are allowed, in which case I would continue to request that we study the possibility of piloting a scramble intersection. Broad and Washington would be a great one. West and Broad is another probably high traffic one. Haycock and 7 would be another one where, and again, like you're really not getting rid of a whole signal phase because you're letting all cars stop and getting rid of one phase. And so it's actually both pedestrian friendly and should not actually slow down car traffic. So I will send that link over so you all have it too.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you for all the comments and good discussion on this. Anything else? Okay. Thank you for joining us, Chief.
Thank you.
Okay, we have 1C. Sally?
Thank you. As you're aware, and the city has been discussing a proposed accessory dwelling ordinance, and in the course of those discussions, the possibility has been raised of imposing an owner occupancy requirement. I have researched that issue and have provided advice to both the Planning Commission and the City Council. However, that and I think it's known that my advice was that there's legal uncertainties associated with that requirement. And based on my attendance at the last Planning Commission meeting, that subject, the members would like to continue to discuss it. And it's difficult because the conversation is somewhat constrained by the privilege that was attached to the communications I sent to the Planning Commission and to the council. And I find myself unable to respond effectively to the questions and the comments or to explain my advice due to that privilege status. The privilege that covers those communications is a privilege that belongs to the City Council on behalf of the city as a municipal corporation. And if the council would prefer to kind of lift that constraint and have a more full public discussion of owner occupancy, it has the authority, the body has the authority to authorize me as the city attorney to publicly disclose that legal advice by waiving the privilege that you hold. In my opinion, the risk of waiving that privilege and of disclosing that advice to the public is low. The communications at issue contained a legal analysis and a case law review, which in my opinion, I would characterize as fairly straightforward as an analysis of zoning law. If the privilege is waived, the consequence to the city is that any person seeking to challenge an owner occupancy provision, if it were included in our ordinance, would then have my material as reference on how to successfully challenge that provision. So if it were included in our ordinance, we would have disclosed how to defeat that provision in the ordinance. Other risks include if the council's waiver of the privilege as to owner occupancy could be viewed potentially by a court as a waiver of owner occupancy legal advice on other types of ordinances. So if you adopted a short-term rental ordinance or other ordinances where owner occupancy came up, we could have potentially waived the owner occupancy legal analysis in that case too. I find that to be unlikely. I think the waiver of a privilege will be construed narrowly, but I just want to make you aware of that potential. The other potential that I think is unlikely, but you should be aware of, is that legal advice given on the broader topic of accessory dwellings, not just the owner occupancy provision, could be found by a court to have been waived by waiving this more limited owner occupancy issue. I also would add that I have not given other legal advice on this accessory dwelling ordinance, so at this time, at any rate, that possibility poses no risk of harm. So based on what I've just said, I evaluate the risk of harm to the city from such a waiver as being quite low. And at the same time, I would recognize that there's value in the public understanding the legal arguments of the city, and to the Planning Commission and Council for being openly able to discuss the issue. When you balance that with the low risk of waiving the privilege, I think all of those factors can be considered, and I am comfortable balancing all those factors that waiver would not harm the city. So I did prepare a motion if that interests the city council. It's in front of you. I passed them out this evening. That would effectuate a waiver of that privilege.
We also need to do our disclosure too.
Goodness gracious, thank you for saying that. Yes, this is the item that we're discussing is accessory dwelling units, and all but one of our council members and our city manager has a disclosure to make on the topic. So I will yield the floor. Thank you.
So go ahead and do this now before the discussion. Okay. Start with you, city manager.
So as the city manager, I do want to disclose that I'm the owner of a single-family home in the city along with my wife. I've provided a written disclosure of that. I believe that I can participate at the staff level in a fair and objective way, and I've provided that and that written statement as well. Thank you.
The city council is discussing tonight the proposed accessory dwelling unit ordinance. I, like many others in the city, am an owner of residential property that would be eligible for an accessory dwelling unit if the proposed ordinance were to pass. And as a result, my property may realize a reasonably foreseeable direct or indirect benefit from the ordinance. After careful thought, I've determined that I'm able to participate in this transaction fairly, objectively, and in the public interest.
The City Council is discussing tonight the proposed accessory dwelling unit ordinance. I, like many others in the city, am an owner of a residential property that would be eligible for an accessory dwelling unit if the proposed ordinance were to pass, and as a result, my property may realize a reasonably foreseeable direct or indirect benefit from the ordinance. After careful thought, I've determined that I am able to participate in this transaction fairly, objectively, and in the public interest.
The City Council is discussing tonight the proposed accessory dwelling ordinance. I, like many others in the city, am an owner of residential property that would be eligible for an accessory dwelling unit if the proposed ordinance were to pass, and as a result, my property may realize a reasonably foreseeable direct or indirect benefit from the ordinance. After careful thought, I've determined that I'm able to participate in this transaction fairly, objectively, and in the public interest.
The city council is discussing tonight that the proposed, is taking action or potentially will take action proposed, relating to the proposed accessory dwelling unit ordinance. I, like many others in the city, am an owner of residential property that would be eligible for an accessory dwelling unit if the proposed ordinance were to pass. And as a result, my property may realize a reasonably foreseeable direct or indirect benefit from the ordinance. After careful thought, I've determined that I am able to participate in this transaction fairly, objectively, and in the public interest.
The City Council is discussing tonight the proposed accessory dwelling unit ordinance. I, like many others in the city, am an owner of a residential property that would be eligible for an accessory dwelling unit if the proposed ordinance were to pass, and as a result, my property may realize a reasonably foreseeable direct or indirect benefit from the ordinance. After careful thought, I have determined that I am able to participate in this transaction fairly objectively and in the public interest.
The City Council is discussing tonight the proposed accessory dwelling unit ordinance. I, like many others in the city, am an owner of residential property that would be eligible for an accessory dwelling unit if the proposed ordinance were to pass, and as a result, my property may realize a reasonably foreseeable direct or indirect benefit from the ordinance. After careful thought, I've determined that I am able to participate in this transaction fairly, objectively, and in the public interest.
Thank you. Discussion on what Sally has proposed. Thank you. Laura?
Thank you, Sally, so much. I'll just say I am in support of this. When we first began talking about accessory, I guess when I was first elected and really researching this, I was leaning towards having some sort of owner occupancy requirement. And, while I was on school board, I always followed our council's advice. And that's why we have council. And listening to you tonight, Ms. Justin, I think you made it very clear that the pros outweigh the cons, that there could be some risk, but not a lot. And to me, the benefit of being transparent and helping the public understand why we're making the decisions we're making. So in this case, again, originally I was leaning towards owner occupancy, but if the advice of our council is that, legally that might not be in our best interest, because we could be opening ourselves up to potential lawsuits, that sort of thing. So, based on the legal advice, then I would definitely change my mind, but I would also want to be able to explain that to the public, and that's hard to explain if everything's privileged. So I think that we are able to have more robust conversations both on this council and the Planning Commission, and we're more transparent to help the public understand. So I am in support of this. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Erin?
So I guess, my general view on it is that I wouldn't necessarily support waiving attorney-client privilege. I think is a general matter. It's an important privilege to retain. I was frankly a little bit surprised at the last Planning Commission staff report, because I actually think it almost went beyond what should have been in the staff report and arguably waived privilege without council's direction or authority to do so. And so in my mind, this came up on tonight's agenda almost because the privilege had already been waived, frankly, in terms of the amount of information that was in the Planning Commission staff report as to the legal analysis and as to sort of city attorney bottom line on sort of the position. I think that it becomes difficult because it's sort of this half conversation that's been in the public and half conversation that hasn't been, and I would have been more comfortable, as I said, to think about the policy considerations, and if there were like a bottom line, the city attorney has advised us this way or that way, not to do that, but I'm much less comfortable putting like your legal analysis as an attachment to an agenda item, because then it just invites, fly specking of, oh, what is the city attorney's analysis? And I, as a member of the public, can I contact the city attorney about the city attorney's analysis? And it's like, no, you're generally not engaging with members of the public about your analysis. And to the extent you have planning commissioners raising, well, other city attorneys or other land use attorneys are, giving conflicting advice on this, let's say, like that isn't necessarily a great debate to be having in the public. And it also means that there's like half the debate is happening, and then you have sort of this same issue on the other side of someone saying, well, I have this conflicting legal advice, but I don't necessarily feel like I should waive the privilege as to that legal advice, right? So for me, I think like as a broader policy point, like this isn't a great way to proceed or like precedent to set in terms of like why in certain instances is it more important when all of what council's doing is like in the public interest, and we have to grapple with difficult decisions, and we have to make judgment calls about like whether we're going to follow or not follow your legal advice. Like why in one instance should it be an attachment to an agenda item, but in like all other instances it isn't? And why, if we are departing from, everything that the other jurisdictions have like embraced, should we be putting, for example, like a roadmap of how you challenge every other jurisdiction in Virginia, like out as the Falls Church city attorney advice, right? Like, I think that there are practical considerations generally, and then I think that there's just like, it's maybe not great precedent for us as a body to do.
Other thoughts? Debbie?
I guess I'd just be curious as your reaction to those comments, since I'm not a practicing attorney and you both are. I defer to your knowledge, and I'd be interested to see what you think, if you think any differently after those additional comments.
Those are, fair points, but it doesn't change kind of my risk of the harm. I don't think, I think the council gets to choose in each and every instance whether it waives a privilege. Waiving a privilege once doesn't mean you've set a precedent that requires you or makes it more likely that you would have to waive a privilege in the future. So in this particular case, because there's so many kind of phantom attorneys in the background working and giving conflicting advice that nobody gets to see and nobody gets to debate, it's made it a difficult topic to, it's made it this is just a particularly difficult case. And when I look at the legal advice that's been laid out, I don't see any real risk of harm to the city to have the advice be known. And it would take that real, kind of that false constraint and that kind of awkwardness that comes from not being able to say kind of half of it and not other parts of it. It's made it difficult to have this public debate. And when I weigh those against each other, given the low risk of harm to the city, it doesn't, what Councilmember Flynn said, they're fair points, but it wouldn't change my analysis in this case.
Thanks to you both.
Other thoughts? Dave?
So I'm not entirely sure what sort of precedent we're setting here, which concerns me a great deal, because I don't think we've ever taken an action like this before, and I'm wondering why in this particular circumstance an action this extraordinary is being asked for. Number one. Number two, there is a downside risk if the city, for example, for policy reasons, if consistent with those of other major jurisdictions, decided that owner occupancy was something we wanted to do, We've now got a published legal opinion from the city attorney undercutting that, which would be a significant negative, and I think you pointed that out in litigation, so it's not without downside risk. So I'm a little bit concerned about that as well. So I just want to express those concerns. I'm not sure this justifies an extraordinary action. This is a highly political issue right now in the city, and my initial reaction is why now versus many other cases where there have been political issues with the city attorney expressing an opinion. On the other hand, I appreciate the role of transparency here, so that's sort of an interesting point, and it's already sort of halfway privilege anyway. So I'm sort of a mixed mind on this at this point, but I don't understand why we're doing it now, and I don't understand, frankly, why this circumstance is so unique. But in any event, the request is before us, and so I think we need to take action on it.
Justine?
My preference is to have this as a public discussion. I generally don't think that this is something to hide. These legal arguments are out there, and I think that there's great value in having the public understand the legal arguments and having this discussion in the sunshine and having transparency alongside it.
I'll just agree with Ms. Underhill. That was very well said. Thank you. I'm not an attorney. I hear the concerns of the attorneys, but I think the transparency is important. It's been highly discussed in the community, and people have come to me and said, I said, well, the city attorney advised this, and the response I got from some of the community was, well, you can do whatever you want. You don't have to listen to the city attorney. And having heard what the city attorney said, I was sort of surprised at that. So I think it is important that people in the community understand, because this is a very much discussed topic amongst very educated people who have strong opinions. So I think it is important that we share it.
Okay. So weighing on this, I think clearly because other jurisdictions have chosen to add owner occupancy, what I will say is we are not privy to the legal advice that they got. What we do see is the decision the political parties chose to do. So given that we have our own counsel and we've gotten advice, I think I would also err on the side of transparency, given that it's been discussed already. Separately, I personally just think it's also poor policy and unenforceable. And so those should be part of our consideration as always. Like anytime we pass an ordinance, if we can't enforce it, that should be part of our decision making. But as it relates to the legal advice, I think given what's in front of us, I would like to go forward with the city attorney's recommendation. Someone have a motion?
I move that City Council make available to the public the privileged communications delivered by the city attorney to the Planning Commission and to the City Council concerning the legalities, risks, and alternatives associated with including an owner occupancy provision within the city's proposed accessory dwelling unit ordinance.
Second.
Second.
Ms. Downs on the second. Call roll, please.
Ms. Connolly?
Yes.
Ms. Downs?
Yes.
Ms. Flynn?
No.
Ms. Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Schneider?
Abstain.
Ms. Underhill?
Yes.
Mayor Hardy?
Yes.
That passes with 1 no and 1 abstention.
So in terms of next steps, Sally, given the Planning Commission's taking this up on Wednesday, is your plan to discuss this in their meeting, or what's the tactical next step?
I would advise them that they are permitted to discuss the information they've received from me, and I'll be present at the meeting if they have any questions they'd like me to answer, but they'll be aware that they can discuss those matters.
Thank you. Thank you for the discussion on this. Anything else on this one? Okay. Let's move on to the consent items, Wyatt.
So we are requesting a review of 3 contract approvals for the consent. One is with Compost Crew, and the council has had briefings on sort of significant changes to the composting policy. This is not that. This is really just a continuation of the current policy where people can subscribe and pay a monthly fee to be able to have curbside pickup from Compost Crew. That contract has been in place for several years, and we anticipated it would stay under 100,000, so we had not brought it to council for approval. Now, with a slight uptick in people subscribing and the normal cost increases, we anticipate that we will exceed the $100,000 threshold and go to 110 in the current fiscal year, and so we're asking for council authorization for that expenditure. The second is approval of an appropriation under the city's approved capital improvements program to, and the contract is with ComSec Incorporated for keyless access cards at the Aurora House and at the community center, as well as some camera upgrades and system upgrades for the system that works at City Hall, the library, and other facilities as well. And so that contract authorization request is for $400,000, and that is a project that is in the capital improvements program. And then the last item on consent is for next week is a contract in the amount of $425,000 and a contract with 72-hour LLC DVA National Auto Fleet for procurement of electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles. This is 100% funded with a grant that the city has received for this purpose, and the vehicles that would be purchased are listed in the staff report. I'd be happy to answer any questions on that, but this is one of our strongest moves we've been able to make so far on our green fleet transition. The schools are a step ahead of us on their school bus program, just in terms of the dollar investments, but this will be a significant move for our Public Works Department. The remaining dollars in that grant is being used for charging infrastructure at the property yard.
And are those prices fixed on that green fleet like that? I'm just thinking about the tariffs that are being implemented tomorrow and what I was reading about the price of electric vehicles jumping sky high very quickly. So are those fixed rates in that contract, or this is just an authorization to spend up to that amount? I know they're listed, so I'm sorry if it already said it in there.
Let me get back with you on that. I know that those are prices that are in the contract, but might there be a provision in that contract that says, I know that many people are putting in sentences in all contracts that they're held harmless for tariff increases.
Yeah.
I'll check for that language.
Just have concerns it may not bias what I'm excited that this is moving forward, but I have concerns that it may not bias what we thought it would purchase even, a couple weeks ago.
Now, one thing I will say is there are Buy America requirements in that grant, so that it may not be, I don't know what the tariff exposure is, but that is one of the core provisions of that act, and we are in full compliance with those Buy America provisions.
Great. And then just another comment. I know this is for our current contract with the composting, but I still just want to make sure we're thinking about future agreements with them if we are able to move forward some type of program that opens up to more of our residents, or we incorporate it into a rate or other things. So that's just a comment versus consent item. Thank you.
So we would be able to have that flexibility, but that's a separate policy question that'll come at a later date for the council.
Okay, Laura.
Thank you, Wyatt. On also the composting, I did just notice a typo on line 50. It says the contract has an initial term through June 31st, 2020, so it should be June 30th.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And then, so just following up on that sentence, so with up to 4 successive one-year renewal options, can that price each year then increase depending on participation?
So the authorization is for 110,000, so we would need to come back to you if we're going to exceed that amount, I think within some thresholds, percentage thresholds. Let me get back with you let me answer the question before next week.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And then the other question I had was about the security. And I was just reading through on line 15, talking about in October 2022. And I was just curious, I'm not trying to point fingers or lay blame, but is the reason that it's taken a couple years, is it because it was on the CIP track and it was put in, for that cycle? Okay, I understand. I'm supportive of this. I think people I just recently had travel to New Orleans. I think we all know about what happened there on New Year's Day. And, New Orleans City Council was given security recommendations to block those streets, and they didn't do it. And so, I think this is definitely something that we need to move forward on. So thank you very much.
And I would note that security audit had a lot of recommendations. We've taken a lot of the smaller actions that didn't need a CIP approval.
Right.
And so I wanted the council to
But I
be
figured it
assured of
was,
that.
right, just how we slotted. Okay, thank you very much.
Erin?
I just had confirmation on the third item on the auto fleet that we would need to do these upgrades regardless. So regardless of what the funding is, we would need to make this investment.
Yes. And that's one of the reasons it's taken us a little bit of time to move forward on this purchase, because we have older vehicles that are phasing out, and this is replacing those. So this is in the normal course of our fleet replacement.
So I couldn't actually find the staff report. It's not linked in the item on the online agenda.
Oh,
Oh, yeah, I meant to mention that.
So I couldn't actually read what, I was
Yeah.
interested in what the fleet changes were.
I picked up the paper copy outside, and so that's why I just looked at it, but it's correct that it's still not there, so it should be added to the online agenda.
It just says 425, and I was going to ask, what are we buying?
Yeah.
okay. So it's 2 Ford E-Transit cargo vans. Those are 100%
Can we go back
EV.
online to look at it, Cindy?
It's not there yet.
I can't post.
It's 2 Ford F-150 Lightning pickups, 100% EV, and then it's 6 Ford Maverick hybrids and 2 Ford 150 hybrids. And the hybrids, those are for missions that go on longer than your typical battery charge, that are times when the work is going to exceed what that charge would be, and that's why there's the mix.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions, comments on these three items? I was going to plus one what Debbie said about the third bin option. So when I did the math, the 110, I think it's for 110,000 for compost crews, 582 households, and that works out to be $190 per household that we're subsidizing. And they already pay either $88 a year or $165 a year based on the online information to sign up for compost crew. And so I guess if we have the opportunity to consider the idea of a third bin for all, I'd want to compare those numbers with what the numbers would be. Theoretically, you would have some scale, right? If you're doing it across the city and you actually reduce your tipping fees and you have less trash because more people are composting, the math should work out where you would be able to provide that service for everybody without as big of a subsidy per household. I don't think people understand that's $190 per household per year.
I think the total cost will go up. The subsidy per household would go down.
And just to tag on, just to be also along with this is the comments we got from Ms. Silverman last go around with what they're paying for regular trash collection. I think I know they're somewhat different, but also somewhat related in terms of out-of-pocket expenses.
Yeah, I think there's probably a majority of us that's still interested in exploring the idea of more equity across single-family households versus multifamily condos and townhomes that essentially pay for it out of their tax rate but don't get service. That seems to be something that keeps coming up, at least for the past several years. And it'd be great to tackle that at some point. Okay. Anything else on the three consent items?
Need a motion?
I don't think we have motions. It's just going to be in next week's schedule, right?
Oh, yeah, request, review, and schedule, we're not doing tonight.
Okay. Do we want to talk about schedule tonight before we go into closed session with Sally?
Yes.
Okay. And then we can cancel the Wednesday morning meeting. Okay, Wyatt?
So I'm going to need my spectacles to read the smaller print.
It's on the screen if that helps.
So we do have, we do,
Do you need to borrow? Are you serious?
I'm squinting. I'm going to soldier on.
Do we want to zoom in on this so we could read this?
No, I can see it.
Sure? How big I can make it?
Wow, that's really good, yeah.
That's what the touchscreen.
So we do have GovOps this, we will have an event for Jim Snyder tomorrow at 4 o'clock. I just wanted to note that. The clerk, I think, did share that invitation. And then on Friday, we have a GovOps committee. One thing I should hold on, just let's take it in order here. On the 5th, if we do cancel the mayor's agenda meeting, we do still have a 9 o'clock Ask the Council, so it'd be a half an hour later. GovOps on Friday at 9 o'clock, and we'll be talking about process improvements generally, and we'll also be talking about a roadmap on the permitting process improvements. March 10th, regular session, Women's History Month, Brown's Hardware proclamation. We'll have the Missing Link Sidewalk Plan, a briefing and discussion. The
Sorry,
EDA
Wyatt, could I
Yeah.
stop you? So just so we go chronologically, what's not on there right now is the March 8th pop-up resource fair for federal contractors,
That's on Saturday, that's right.
Saturday the 8th. Can I just get a check on who's planning to go? Because I know that's 12 to 5 at Wakefield High School.
I should be able to go in on the later or something.
Okay. Anyone else?
I'm able to go for part of it.
Okay. There's not like meant to be speeches, it really is like a resource information fair, but I think we're just trying to plan for head count and that sort of thing.
And will city staff be there?
Yes, we'll have city staff, 2 tables representing the city of Falls Church and then the other. So you all are able to network and hear issues directly. And it's just important to know sort of the total count of council, but we don't need to know your exact arrival time or duration. It's 12 to 5.
I did go to when Bayer had his staff at the library last Wednesday here. He had like office hours, and so I stopped by for a good hour and a half, and there was actually a fair number of people who had come with, who were, Fed workers, either currently still employed or no longer employed, and so it's just good to hear from people directly about what their concerns are. So to the extent that you can make it and make time on a Saturday, I think that's good to hear from our constituents. Thank you. Thank you, Cindy, for the work on that. I know it's been quick to pull together, so.
Certainly.
And we'll add that to the schedule.
Thank you.
And the city website also has job resources and other resources for members of the community that are impacted by the workforce reductions at the federal government.
So Mayor, if I could just confirm, I heard 3 council members
I'll be
attending
there.
on Saturday?
I'll be there in the first half, I think.
Laura and Mary Beth.
And I'm a tentative.
And
Are you okay?
Are you able?
Thank you.
So the Economic Development Authority, so we'll have the Missing Link Sidewalk Plan. The Economic Development Authority will be there for their annual report. We have a closed session on the H-1B visa question that may not be on the agenda based on tonight's discussion. The 2 ordinances that we just discussed will be on the agenda. Under other business, we'll have the love sculpture, the 3 consent items, and then a work session on the accessory dwellings. And the purpose of that is to go through the Planning Commission's recommendations.
I may be calling in for that meeting.
And I will likely be absent from that. I'll be in Europe on that night. I'll try to pull a Mayor Hardy, but I'm not sure if I can.
It's not easy.
It was miserable.
Not easy.
Dave does it all the time.
March 17th, sewer capacity purchase agreement, tree canopy code scoping discussion. We'll have a discussion on the community survey report. And we'll have a Broad Washington sidewalk easement vacation. I think that's pretty as much as a pre-consent review. It's something that's not terribly meaningful in terms of the pedestrian experience, but it's a technical thing that we need to do. So we're not having budget and finance on the 21st. I thought I had updated the schedule. At any rate, so that's not on the.
Yeah, I think it was just that one that was still on there, but I think everything else is.
So there will be a budget and finance committee on April 11th.
Yeah.
And that will be our third quarter financial report. And we'll have the updated revenue picture for the council to be able to see as you're considering the FY26 budget. March 24th, proclamation for Equal Pay Day and an initiating resolution for the tree canopy ordinance. We'll present the school board and the city manager's proposed budgets and kick off budget season. We'll have second reading on the two ordinances we just discussed and this sidewalk easement vacation. On March 28th at Clarendon Downs, there's at 6 p.m. or maybe 6:30 p.m. there's an event celebrating Brown's Hardware. I'm going to skip to April 3rd. We'll have our budget town hall. On the April 7th work session, we'll have our budget work session with a focus on the capital improvements program, final review of the sewer capacity purchase agreement. And then April 14th, Planning Commission will be there for their annual report, first reading on the budget ordinances and the tax and fee ordinances. Second reading and public hearing on the accessory dwellings, and second reading on the sidewalk easement vacation. That has to be done by ordinance. Looking ahead to April 21st, budget work session on operations and strategic priorities, judicial agreement, Tenor Hill and Southgate rezoning, and a review of the affordable living policy.
Well, I know I asked this before, but if there's any way we could have even the day of the school board's presentation, so we're not trying to digest it on the fly. I know there's some things that we can look up on the website, like question and answers and things like that, but that would be helpful. I know we talked about this, that sometimes I'd like to have the big presentation, but even just a couple hours before the meeting, I think we would be able to have better questions for the school board if we had an hour or two just to look at it digest it beforehand.
So our goal this year is going to send everything out on the Thursday packet.
Oh, okay.
Great. The weekend.
If there's some crisis why that can't happen, I'll let the council know, but that's what that's our operating
Thank you.
I think we were able to do that last year.
Yeah.
So that was a nice precedent.
Right.
Can I ask a question about the schedule? And maybe this came up at last week's meeting that I missed by mistake. Virginia Village, next steps?
Yeah.
That kind of fell off the schedule again. And I guess I'm interested in, even if we're not having a full discussion, some interim update as to what's going on. Is there any work happening? What's the anticipated timeline?
So I've been drafting a memo for the city council that's fairly lengthy to provide some things to think about and an update of the things that staff has been doing. So that will be coming out to council shortly, certainly by the end of this week. And I do have some discussions with the city attorney of what can be appropriately discussed in closed session, because it is a sort of essentially real estate transactions. But we want to, there'll be certain things that can be discussed in closed session and certain things that probably can't be, and we have to just navigate that. And
I guess I would ask on that, and we've talked about this before with some of the housing-related items, that, we just don't get an email to council because it puts us in a difficult position when it's not actually privileged communications of not having, we just had a discussion about transparency, and I will say I get a fair number of questions about what's happening at Virginia Village. And when I get emails to a council email box, that's just kind of like an update, I don't always feel, like that's information that I can necessarily like share with the constituent, given the way that it's been shared with council. And so I think that in the spirit of transparency, that where they're not like real estate acquisition type items, then there should be a public update. And this is now dragged on, I will say, in somewhat of, deliberate use of language for several months, where it's on the calendar, it's off the calendar. I receive public requests about what's happening. I say it's coming up on the calendar, it was postponed on the calendar, and now it's off the calendar again. So I would like there to be, much more of a concerted effort, given this council's repeated kind of questions about what we're doing on the affordable housing front. And we're now a year plus into sort of, this work plan, and there's a large affordable housing like component of it. And I feel like, frankly, we haven't been doing what we need to do on this front, and we haven't been like elevating it to the level that it deserves as council discussion.
Erin, do you mean the Fields or Virginia Village, or both?
Frankly.
Both. I think Wyatt, we talked about getting updates to council for both.
So thank you.
Okay.
Other things?
A couple of things on scheduling. We started talking about Vision Zero earlier this evening with the chief's presentation. Right at my house, there's a three-way stop, Columbia and Van Buren Street, and we've gone through multiple iterations of bumping out curbs, changing striping, asking people to cut things back, and we kind of have these ebbs and flows over the last 20 plus years I've lived there of safety. We've had several near misses again in that area. People just blow through that stop sign on Columbia. I don't know why. I mean, we've made multiple, it goes back to driver behavior. However, that said, I've been discussing with my neighbors Vision Zero and taking the concepts and applying them across the city, and how this should be helping overall, not just in individual intersections. And so I was like, it's on our schedule, and I see it is, but it's in that to be scheduled. So to the extent you can just give a time frame, like, is that the end of the year, next, 2026, like when it fits in, that would be good to know, just because these conversations are happening real time. So my request is to, I know there are a lot of details to work through on Vision Zero and how we would adopt it for Falls Church, but to the extent you can share more of a time frame, that would be great. And then the next scheduling question I have is a CDA, a Community Development Authority meeting at West Falls. I think we were supposed to have one first quarter-ish. And there was a request for scheduling one, so I don't know who would schedule that, or if I should be scheduling.
Yeah, I'll take the lead in scheduling that.
Okay.
I think there is a request that there be one in the month of March, and so that I'll get an email out to everybody. It's on the CDA. We also, Bob Young was a member of the CDA, and he's no longer with us. Peter Kean is the alternate, and so we'll invite him to the meeting. I don't think he's been active before that I can recall, and so we'll make sure that he has been included in all correspondence, but so that will be kind of a new addition to the board. We won't have an EDA member to the board, and we probably should, and so I think it's probably something for the city council to take up under appointments.
Okay, and that's it. I have other comments, but maybe people go with more scheduling things first.
Just one matter. The legislative committee, I think the sense was to not hold the meeting on Wednesday as previously planned. Is that right?
Correct. I'm recommending canceling the March 5th one, and the proposed date would be the morning of March 11th or 12th, pending on committee members' availability.
Okay, why don't we check on people's availability and get back to Cindy on that.
Yeah,
Yeah, you should have mine.
either one.
Why could you send out this updated set over whatever tweaks there are since today? We have it.
Yep.
I just had a little discussion when we get to that.
I had one thing that welcome to join me for. So on March 16th, the city of Fairfax is coming to town to explore trails. I had made an informal offer to members of their council just because they're debating several trail projects in Fairfax City. And so their council's going to come into town on a Sunday and walk. I was thinking WNOD and Howard Herman. The offer is out there if you all would like to go for a walk with us too. Also, I was not thinking of requiring staff to work on a Sunday, but if people would like to join on a nice day, it's a nice day, they're welcome to do that.
Depending on the weather.
It'll be Sunday, the 16th from 2 to 4. And so I still need to figure out the route. We can meet at City Hall, Cathedral Trails. So it's a great day, people are using it, and then we loop around on Broad Street and take Howard Herman and come back up to probably 2 to 3 miles or so. So more of an FYI who'd like to meet with members of Fairfax City Council. One request why. That's good to do. However, I would also like to ask that we benchmark just also the median tax impact, so rate times assessment. So given that our assessments are likely higher than our neighbors, I think even with the proposed 2.5% cut, the tax impact way higher, and that's really what they understand, and that's what they feel. And in light of
Gotten there.
But then, no, they're not being mailed, and they all were mailed at.
I will just throw out the benchmarking. Cost, right, that is baked into our tax rate here, so that's.
And, right, and Vienna pays town taxes and county taxes, those are, but you have to have all that because.
We've had that on a
Yeah,
chart
we've gotten
before.
in the
I
past,
just-
yeah.
I used to have it, but
Okay. You said, Debbie, you had other
I
items?
just had a couple.
Sure.
I just wanted to thank you. Last Wednesday, we talked about the Columbia and Cherry Street problem, and it was temporarily fixed pretty promptly, like the next day or so. And so thank you for that and the encouragement to get that done. And the neighbors will be awaiting the final paving, but now at least it's continues to be safe. So thank you for that. I also wanted to just, if you would give a quick update on that pole, like what is, the pole on North Washington, it's a different pole, but it still impacted the city hall and city operations. So there were conversations with Dominion about not having that single tracked, and evidently it still is. Could you give any updates to those conversations with Dominion or give us some sense of how we safeguard
So I'll
city
just
operations?
briefly, I'll say a few words, and Cindy can provide a little bit more of an update. But yes, it was not the pole that has been struck 3 times. It was the pole next to it, same effect. And when they do take that, power stayed on for a period of time, but once they replace the pole, they need to de-energize it. And that affected about 300 accounts, including some of our key businesses who were impacted as well, and City Hall. One thing that was unique about it for us is that we were in the midst of routine maintenance for our backup generator when this crash happened, and so it had some unique negative impacts for us and our network because of that sort of wrinkle for us. It's good that we're doing routine maintenance, but the timing was bad. Cindy, in terms of discussions with Dominion?
Yes, so the project that would give us the redundancy off of North Washington and bring it in Park Avenue is designed, and the power line will come up into conduits and tie into the Park Avenue Great Street project, and then do a step-down transformer between City Hall and the farmhouse where we already have green boxes. So
All right,
that's,
we have to wait till Great Streets before we get redundancy off those 2 poles?
we have a meeting next week to be able to discuss whether they can proceed up. They've got the design, they're confirming the right-of-way, and see if we can bring it in prior to. Originally, the plan was tied because the construction would be concurrent. So we're looking at the cost impacts and the timing to proceed it earlier.
And if we can't pull it up Great Streets, it's 2028?
Currently working on the review and the access, because a lot of the conduit work is funded under the CIP, so we got to segregate out the design and the cost functions.
Yes, I would say that just doesn't seem acceptable to wait till 2028 to not have City Hall go out power if this pole continues, or 2 poles continue to get hit.
Yeah, and I mean, I emailed Cindy and Wyatt separately about this because we're one of the 300 households, I think Councilmember Snyder's probably one of them too, that consistently when City Hall goes out, you know, we lost power at 9:30 at night without notice for like an entire 8 hours because, you know, it was de-energized, and I understand that, but like last year it was 16 hours during the middle of winter, and then another year, you know, it's happening with enough frequency that I think we do need to think about, you know, given that City Hall is on this line and you have affected neighborhoods, can this get done sooner than Great Streets? And beyond that, you know, is there sort of an OCOM mechanism so that when this happens, or there's a planned outage, or there's, you know, a disruption from an accident, that there can be like targeted messaging that occurs so that people have a sense of, you know, how long a fix this is going to be, or how long you're potentially going to be, you know, without power.
Reviewing both of those items, and during the outage, I was in regular communication with Gaston and Kevin, so they're aware of it, and we're looking at options for sooner than later.
I guess the other question is, why are these 2 poles getting hit 4 times in a year? And I know we talked about making them more visible, so if we can't fix the redundancy issue sooner, which can we have people stop hitting the poles?
Public Works has actually assessed that, and part of the challenge is just the road geometry and speeding, and actually was talking to the chief about being more visible out there for enforcement on speeding.
Something must have changed, right? Like, it's really been 4 times in a year.
Yeah, but nothing has changed. Those poles have been there for 50 years. And so it is.
Columbia Baptist opened in the past year, actually.
There's a big building.
There's a big new building and a big new stop. Like, the street actually has changed in that stretch.
And the sidewalk is wider. That's the only
Yeah.
thing.
Maybe it's visually that you're coming past, the church is closer there, and I don't know. There's a building that's closer as you drive by.
There were accidents prior to, it just, last fall we had the 3 and then this one, so it's definitely an ultimate goal would underground the power lines so that they're not being
That's a
hit.
good goal. Yeah.
Dave?
Thanks. This sounds like a repeat of a conversation we've had before. I would just ask city staff, if you need a formal action by city council, or you need any of us there, meeting with Dominion to underscore the city's priority on fixing this in terms of redundancy. I'm sure many council members would be interested in participating. I know I would. So the other thing is, the weirdness about that street is there's not much of a curb, but there's enough of a curb. If you keep going straight, you're going to hit those poles. So I guess it's too hard for people to go 35 miles, or what is the speed limit there? 20, 25, 20. It's too hard to go 25 miles an hour and stay on the street, apparently. So if that's true, then we've got to take some actions to prevent these repeated power outages. Obviously, as an individual, I don't like it, but I'm more concerned about the city's operations. So is there a way by which the council can emphasize that we really want redundancy created here and that it can't wait? I think that point's been made, so.
I would say let's do the meeting and I'll brief Mr. Shields and then we could circle back. I would say the Dominion knows it's a priority. It's the matter of funding and the timing and the construction. So we'll have to see what options and I'll report back to Mr. Shields.
I mean, to justify creating redundancy, I know there may be a cost, but how many places in the entire Commonwealth of Virginia do you have the same pole hit and no action is taken about it with regard to Dominion Power, especially when the poles that are hit are feeding critical governmental infrastructure? So I think the bigger picture is, yeah, we know there's a cost, but arguably this is a justified circumstance under which the condition needs to be adjusted, it seems to me. So again, it's an offer. I know staff has been working on this, but we got to move on this somehow, and it really is it's not unique anymore.
Perhaps it's an opportunity for special legislation at the state level, in the sense that when government operations are impaired by a pole that has had certain vulnerabilities exposed, that the law is Dominion has to fix that situation within a certain amount of time. And that is a public interest that the state might be willing to take up.
I guess we'll echo Dave's comment. We're happy to escalate this with our government affairs people in Dominion.
Received, thank you.
Just a quick question. Is there something that if people are driving distracted or recklessly or whatever else, is there something else that they could hit instead of hitting the pole and then causing the outage? Could we put just a gigantic big barrier there? What? Sure, so put something, it would be better if they hit a cement wall than if they hit the
Some flexi posts leading to the sidewalk leading up to it.
Public Works will reassess it. Our former Public Works Director did look at that. Part of it is the constraint to the lane, and then you could have more major physical injuries to the vehicle if they hit a Jersey wall versus a pole. So they were trying to sort out options, and it's pretty constrained other than the reflective tape we've tried, which doesn't work.
Counterintuitively, actually creating a pinch point or something else, actually, at least from the research, makes people pay attention more. And so having some sort of traffic narrowing or diversion there will give people the sense that, I need to pay attention and not drive so fast. Or
Narrowing, yes. A Jersey wall in front of the pole, no, because then you have a car hitting a heavy concrete. So exploring options.
Being different and makes you go, what is this?
The speed limit on North Washington is 35 or 30?
I think it's 25 in the city.
Well,
Not that people go that.
when we did the conversion to 20 miles per hour, we also had as a process to move that whole section to 25 miles per hour. I'll need to check the signage and make sure that happened, but that was the intent. It then goes to 35 once you get into Arlington County, but that was the only 100 yards in the entire city that was 35 miles per hour, and we thought we'd rectify that.
Not on South Washington, it's still 30.
Oh, 30, yeah.
Talked about taking the 25.
That was the policy question.
That's the Fairfax County side of the road.
No, our
though.
side.
Both, I mean, it's both, but it's,
I had thought it was just on North Washington, it's on South as well.
Washington is still 30, I think, I want to say. Is 29 in our purview to actually do traffic calming and slow it down further with narrowing of lanes? Like get the lanes down to 10 feet wide and that would slow cars down maybe?
So anything we would do would need to go through VDOT.
But as part of the North Washington CIP, which has some preliminary reviews when we applied to MBTA, that is part of the concept of narrowing the lanes so you could allow for either bus rapid transit or shared bike bus options. So that would be part of the design and the community engagement. So long-term, that also would underground improve the intersection for crosswalks and stuff, which would naturally slow down. But what we're talking about is figuring out a way to do something sooner than later on redundancy and some interim safety measures on the road.
Yeah, it's interesting, that actually section gets really backed up at rush hour. So I think that's one of the worst congested strips, but this is, at rush hour, in the evening, heading south, it's backed way up. But I think, I don't think it matters when there's no rush hour, I think people are just speeding down that road, no matter what the speed limit is.
It's rush hour all the time.
there you go. Yep.
Okay. Debbie, I think you had other items, right?
Yeah,
Besides the poll?
I'll just move some of these to next Monday, but I just wanted to get an update also on, as I was going through my email, on the signage at West Falls Development. We have a big basketball state championship game tomorrow. We're going to have a ton of people in from other jurisdictions. The first time we've ever hosted, which is super exciting, but I guess I want to make sure that all of our signage on detours, pedestrians, where everybody's walking, because there will be people who park further away based upon crowds and parking. I want to make sure that somebody has reviewed and made sure all of our pedestrian signage around the West Falls development is, up, accurate, safe. Just thinking about always it's important, but in particular there's a big crowd tomorrow night.
Yeah, thanks for that. It was all accurate on Friday. We'll check again and make sure it is. And we'll also talk with the schools just to, if they need any help
It
on
was quite windy
communication.
Saturday. I lifted a few of those signs up.
Oh, okay.
The pedestrian detour signs have fallen, at least fallen over after Saturday.
Yeah, so
On
we
my
can make
mind.
sure that they're all up and in place and people understand where they're going, and that would be great. I'd like to be able to continue to host these kind of things in the future, and I think that a good first showing will be great.
Quarterfinal?
It's the state quarterfinal.
State quarterfinal.
Can I add something there? Because I was looking at that from an economic development standpoint, that this is like our first opportunity ever to host such a big game in the city of Falls Church. We've never been able to do it before because we never had a gym the right size before. So it is like the result of our commercial development, and it will lead to people coming and visiting Falls Church. I don't know if there's a way to capture that in some kind of economic development report, but I do think there's a lot of, that would be a good thing to start to do for our economic development offices. What are the,
Ironically, we have an EDA meeting during the game, so
so maybe they could go and.
people who are developing the economy are talking about it, about the game.
Not going to the game.
But I agree completely. And, hopefully it'll show the West Falls development that in future years, if we have that, when those restaurants are open and even potentially places to stay, if people are coming from multi-hours away, they could stay, at a hotel that's across the street from the actual game, which I think is going to be pretty cool. Thanks. I'll save everything else till next week.
Other things, Erin?
I can do some of this by email, but I did have one question following up on the parklet discussion. So, I had previewed for the Citizens Advisory Committee that for Aurora House, that, there was sort of strong views on the various boards and commissions about moving away from sort of naming that these parklets in particular might be geography based. And after the newsletter went out with the names of the parklets, did receive a couple of comments from Aurora House Citizens Advisory Committee members and reassured them that regardless of the geographically based names for those parklets, that there was council support for having the separate signage at the Reflection Garden or Tranquility Circle in Christina Goodwin's memory and honor. And so going into the Aurora House meeting next week, I would like to just know who on staff is the point person for that, for ensuring that that happens, that when those signs go up, that third sign is also part of that, and that we just don't lose track of that effort, given that the city has been coordinating with the family on that installation. And then I think the ceremony will be in April, so it would be nice to have it in time for the dedication. So I can follow up with that and a couple of other Aurora House specific questions by email, but wanted just to get that out there, given that it was, council support for doing that.
The date for that?
I think we had even talked about, maybe it's even like one as a combined, if that makes it easier, just a combined, sign that has talked about each, so.
I think the EDA tomorrow night's talking about signage, because they funded the signage for Mr. Brown's Park, and they want it to be consistent with the other wayfinding signs. So I think their plan is to get going on the signs now that we've named them for the other two. We could talk about how to incorporate Christina's.
Yeah, that makes sense. And as, liaison, anyone, who's here and there at that meeting, I'm just asking that it, stay part of the discussion, that we don't drop back to 2 signs as opposed to 3 places that we are marking.
I'm happy to put that on my list tomorrow to talk about. Okay. Sorry, I just had one other. We have gotten a tremendous amount of email discussion about a library book, a children's library book that was, that there were those who didn't want listed. I just wanted to have you reconfirm the process. There is a process in place if you don't care for a book that's, think there's a reason a book shouldn't be in our library, that there's a process one goes through and then the library board makes a decision. Could you just repeat that out loud so anybody who's listening or paying attention, that there is a process and it is being followed, and we're not ignoring that there's a set way of doing that?
Well, that's absolutely correct, and we are following that procedure. So there has been an appeal made. It went to an appeal board, and that decision is now being appealed to the Library Board of Trustees itself. They're planning to have a meeting to hear that appeal on March 26th. I don't know that there's much more to be said about it other than that, but I'll stop there.
Okay, I just wanted residents to know that they're not being ignored, that there is a policy in place and that it's going through, working its way through the system. So, thank you.
Do we know, is that defined on the website?
Yes.
Okay. So the public can, that's a, good way to, if anyone ever wanted to research it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Other council comments, discussion items? Dave?
One quick question. The Fairfax County Sewer Agreement, which is not scheduled to come up until April, I guess.
We have a briefing with the council at your next work session on March 17th.
Okay.
2 weeks.
Will that give us the amount of money involved? Okay. And the bonding and all the rest of that, if that's an option?
That's right.
Thanks.
One thing that would be great for OCOM to plug, because I think the changes are happening now, is the WMATA Better Bus Network. The bus rehaul is happening, so signage, according to WMATA, is going up now, even though the changes are happening till June. So our popular 28A is turning into the F20?
F20, yes.
20. And so I think they're apparently going to go and update all the signs at all of our bus stops. So it would be good to let people know about the rebranding. And
Carrie and I are communicating with OCOM. It'll be the new signage going to F to stand for Fairfax County, Falls Church, and Fairfax City, Also, 2 of our bus stops will be consolidated because they're too close together and they're not compliant with the city-adopted bus shelter plan. So we'll be messaging that. WMATA's rolling out the signs over the next 3 months, and we haven't gotten a specific date for like our signs, but as the mayor noted, June 29th is when the change will actually be effective. The new signs will include the new bus route name, but the old one too, to help in the transition, and there'll be a new phone number from WMATA for riders to call if they have questions.
Which bus stops are getting consolidated? Do you know?
There's one down by the Rowell Court area, because it's right near the one closer to the intersection in Taco Bell. And then there's actually one over in the area we've been talking about, North Washington and Power Poles, because there's a bus stop at Kaiser and then just a block down, and they're too close. And they just have flags. Those 2 just have flags and not shelters.
Okay. Any other miscellaneous items before we go into closed session? Okay. Let's someone have a motion to go into closed?
I guess this is upon a motion made by,
Councilmember Connolly?
seconded by,
Councilmember Flynn.
and passed by vote of City Council. Council went into closed session pursuant to VA Code 2.2-3711A8 for consultation with legal counsel employed or retained by the City Council regarding a specific legal matter requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel, specifically to receive advice concerning city sponsorship of H-1B visas. Councilmember Connolly?
Yes.
Councilmember Downs?
Yes?
Councilmember Flynn?
Yes.
Councilmember Sean Siscott, yes. Councilmember Snyder?
Yeah.
Councilmember Underhill?
Yes.
Mayor Hardy?
Yes. We're going to go to Oak?
Yes.
Thank you for doing that.
Wait a second, I'm not sure that was what I was supposed to be doing.
We do it differently for the electronic participation ones. Oh, the Cheez-Its are back. Those were not out earlier. You to get me through this motion.
Lenny and I have the MEH Zoo field trip.
Oh, yeah, we are.
MEH is going to the zoo?
After going to
Really?
zoo today. Or no, they went to Finance Park today, and then they have a zoo tomorrow. Yeah, I'm chaperoning. I'm like, do I have to go to school?
Today.
Yes. Don't they have to go to school? They have a field trip today and a field trip tomorrow?
They always do Camden otherwise. I'm just glad it's going to be warmer tomorrow.
61 supposedly.
You didn't know we had the
Different pandas though.
Yeah.
They didn't bring the same pandas.
The panda cam's back up. It's all the rage.
How long ago?
Couple months.
Couple months.
Interesting. When we had that first snowstorm, and right before that, people want to see.
Are we ready to come out? We're done with panda talk?
Microphone is on, camera is on.
Okay. Upon a motion made by Councilmember
Hiscott?
and seconded by Councilmember,
Downs.
I got Downs, and passed by a vote of City Council, council reconvene in open session. Connolly?
Yes.
Downs?
Yes.
Flynn?
Yes.
Sean Siskott?
Yes.
Snyder?
Yeah.
Underhill?
Yes.
Hardy, yes. Coming out time is 9:57. Let's do the certification now. Upon a motion made by
Connolly?
seconded by,
Flynn?
upon affirmative roll call vote in open session, it was certified that one, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements, and two, only such public business matters as were identified in the motion by which the closed meeting was convened, heard, discussed, or considered in the closed session or meeting by the body. Connolly?
Yes.
Downs?
Yes.
Flynn?
Yes.
Sean Siskott?
Yes.
Snyder?
Yeah.
Underhill?
Yes.
Hardy, yes. Okay, we are back in open session, council. Does someone have a motion?
I do. I move to authorize the city manager to proceed as discussed in closed session.
Second.
Thank you. Call roll, please.
Ms. Connolly?
Yes.
Ms. Downs?
Yes.
Ms. Flynn?
Yes.
Ms. Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yeah.
Ms. Underhill?
Yes.
Mayor Hardy?
Yes.
That passes, council.
Other items to discuss before we adjourn? Motion to adjourn.
Thank you, council.
Move to adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.